welcome back to Psychedelics Today for one of our Solidarity Friday episodes. Today I am joined by a dear friend, Dr. Ido Cohen. Hey Ido, how you doing today?
Good to be back.
Yeah, likewise. I always look at some of our download charts, and you're definitely up there in some of the top downloaded episodes of ours. So I think people like what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm grateful. It's humbling.
Yeah, cool. So before we kick in, just some reminders to everybody. So if you want to support the show over here at Psychedelics Today, you can do so at patreon.com/psychedelicstoday. Leave a small monthly donation. That helps us out. And another really great way to support the show is just share our content, share it around, let people know that you're listening and reading the articles and whatnot. And also be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to leave a review. That helps us out a ton as well. For some class updates, we will be releasing some of our new dates for navigating psychedelics, I think we're going to have that kick off in January. We'll keep you updated on that when we get that confirmed. We also have an upcoming class with Dr. Jerry Brown that is going to kick off on October 26th. That's a Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is kind of like a hybrid class where there's a bunch of pre-recorded material and then jumping on Zoom for an hour and a half with Dr. Jerry Brown to talk about psychedelics past, present, and future. So digging into the history, the research, and then also visioning the future of it, what type of careers and whatnot could be available, how to get involved. So you can check that out at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And then also really excited, hopefully I'll have some more updates around the release date, but we have a ketamine and trauma series course coming up as well, so check that out. Oh, and I guess to backtrack on psychedelics past, present, and future, that will be CE approved. So if you're looking for that will be CE approved. Again, you can check out our education at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. All right, let's jump in here. Ido. So, I guess this episode we're going to explore some themes around facilitation, abuse, etc. But we also should maybe do a little bit of a spoiler alert too. If you haven't seen the show 9 Perfect Strangers, maybe come back to this. I don't know how much of a spoiler we're going to provide in here. Maybe we can kind of keep some of the show, just general topics that have emerged, and kind of keep it that way. But I just want to give you a heads up that if you haven't seen the show yet, hopefully we don't release too much of a spoiler alert, but maybe it's something to come back to, or I think the conversation is going to be worthwhile anyways. So if we spoil it, hopefully that will just have you tune into the show and watch it for yourself. All right, Ido. Well, recently there was a recent article that just got released on Mad in America around psychedelic facilitator abuse, and that's kind of sparked a lot of conversation within the community. And just so happened, I just ended up watching 9 Perfect Strangers this week, and there were just so many themes that came up in that show around facilitation, retreat centers, how people are operating, a lot of ethical concerns in that show as well. And yeah, you just mentioned that you were in the middle of like typing up an Instagram post about the show, so it was like, hey, perfect, let's chat about it. And I thought that was a nice synchronicity there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Gekka. Yeah, I think it was an interesting timing for. I just finished watching the show this week, actually, and then that article came, and I think it's given. I want to say again, I want to start with caveating that it's Hollywood, right? It's Hollywood made, it's Hollywood done, it's for TV, and I think they really did a good job talking about a few of the basically like the important themes in the psychedelic healing world, and also like more of the shadowy topics that we talk but maybe not enough about, which is the role of facilitator, which is power dynamics within the healing process when psychedelics are in part of it, psychedelics are entheogens. The role of community when something like when the imbalances and transgressions happen. And just that they did a really good job in my mind also showing just the realness, somewhat of the realness of the healing process. That healing healing has to do with confrontation, and healing has to do with feeling through things over and over again until you kind of work out the deeper emotions, the deeper acceptance, the deeper grief, the deeper integration pieces of it. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot for us
I guess
to talk.
for those that haven't seen this, so I guess just like a quick little overview of the show. It's about 9 strangers coming together at a luxurious retreat center. It seems like they don't really know what they signed up for, and then that starts to unfold during the show. And why are we talking about this at Psychedelics today? Well, a lot of psychedelic talk and psychedelic experiences in the show as well. So yeah, when I first started off, I was like, I kept seeing people post it around. I was like, I should probably check this out just from like some cultural context and perspective. And yeah, it was really interesting just thinking about like luxury retreats selling healing. But the thing that really started to catch my attention as the show progressed was just around the protocols and consent, right? So people are being unintentionally or intentionally dosed without consent, not knowing about it. And, they're calling it microdosing psilocybin. But I mean, that was the first thing that really popped up in my head was thinking about people that are starting to become really interested in psychedelics. And I know I went through this phase. I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you went through this phase. People that I guess get turned on early on think, oh man, if everybody could have a psychedelic experience, if I could just like maybe dose the water, we would change the world, right? And so that was the first thing that like came to my mind thinking about this facilitator that ended up creating this retreat. It's like, was there this perspective within this character thinking, if I don't tell people what's going on, if I can just create this container for them to kind of dive into their own healing process, could we foster healing there? But I mean, it just brought up so many issues around, this consent issue and, what's a healer's own agenda, right? And thinking like, I'm going to create this retreat center and not tell anybody what's going on. And, since it's a show and kind of fantasy, does she do that with all the guests, right? And with all the retreats, or is it just this one specific retreat that they don't talk about? But yeah, just really kind of that started to catch my attention right off the bat there. It was like, whoa, they're pushing some boundaries here. This is also really dangerous, right? I know in the show that they've done a lot of assessments. They said they did a lot of medical examination, blood sampling, making sure people are healthy enough to deal with what they call the protocol. But, also just thinking about not letting people know ahead of time what they're signing up for. Just like, what is that all about?
I mean, I love that you're starting with that. I mean, right, it already sets us up in 2 interesting topics, which is it's a very fancy, very upscale retreat center. Right, so there's already that conversation. I think that's part of the psychedelic world, which is the world of capitalism and accessibility, and the socioeconomical conversation. Like I think there is a wink there for part of that topic, which is like, right, it's available for those who have money, and it's just really exaggerated in that show. It's like, right, it's a beautiful, serene place where they personalize your morning shake, and it's right like stitched to your DNA and like your needs, and yeah, right, what you're saying about having permission, right? It talks, I think that already sends us into the conversation of the wounded healer guru conversation, which is, if you don't think it's okay, just the thought that you think that it's not okay, that it's okay for you to do that without asking, should trigger a red light for you.
Yeah.
That you're willing to alter people's consciousness without them being aware of it, that you're willing to have people open up, right? That's already problematic. Just the thought of it is problematic, let alone the action. Now, given that's an exaggerated state, I mean, I don't know if there are places in the world that give free microdosing to their guests. Maybe there is, I don't know. But I think we can just take that apart and just be, where does it end for the healer? When it becomes like the healer's narcissism or their grandiosity, to think that they know something that their clients, their patients don't know.
Yeah.
It's okay for them to do that. So it's okay for me to think that I'll just rip you open, but don't worry, I'll also take care of you.
Yeah.
Right, so it already starts to smell a little. It already brings up that topic of where.
I also think it like kind of backtracking too, like smells a little off too, that nobody really knows what they've signed up for, right? Like there's this mystery around it. Like, ooh, have you met this person? Do we know what we're getting into? Like, it seems like there's a lot of questioning around what they signed up for. They do no advertising. It's like word of mouth, it seems like. And what type of expectation does that create within a person kind of going into it?
And what type of expectation, and how does it play to that fine line between safety and feeling safe when you go into a retreat like this, and feeling open to risk?
Yeah.
I've heard facilitators say, don't read about this plant, don't inquire into it, because it will just feed your mind with ideas and expectations, and kind of asking for not the same, but kind of a similar, a blank canvas. Which I'm like, yes, I get it, and what are we actually asking? Like, if a person wants to read because it makes them feel more knowledgeable, more, safer, more grounded in what they're going to do, if it's going to ease their anxieties, that's a bad thing. I don't know.
I mean, I've definitely thought about this, just, I guess, thinking around how much preparation do we do and how much expectation do we create by digging into everything. But I mean, it's something that I think about too when I do breathwork workshops, for example, or when I used to before COVID happened, was how much information do I provide the participants with around, say, in the longer form workshops where we're doing a weekend, we bring up Stan's perinatal birth matrices, right? We talk about Stan's theories on transpersonal psychology, on perinatal birth matrix. For a shorter workshop that I do for introductions, does it make sense to toss that out there, right? Because is it providing more context or expectations that somebody should have an experience of reliving their birth trauma? Maybe not. And so this is something that I think about. It's like, I've painted worst case scenarios in breath work, and then I get the look of like, why would anybody want to do this? Why would I want to relive my birth process? Why would I want to go through this traumatic event all over again? On one hand, I say, it's good to know, because if it comes up, at least that it's in the realm of possibilities, and you can kind of brace yourself for it. But on the other hand, how much is that setting you up to have an experience? And I guess to give you an example was years ago, there was somebody that kept coming to the workshops. And I talk about this, especially in class, when I talk about intention setting. They're like, I just want to relive my birth process. And they were going to workshop after workshop after workshop, and they're so focused on the birth experience where, I had to pull back and say, is that part of your narrative? Is that what the inner healing intelligence wants? Is that what the medicine is trying to show you as well? Maybe not, right? So how do we also loosen those expectations and what we were planning to get out of it? But, from a harm reduction perspective, I think it is important for people to have consent around what they're signing up for and knowing what they're going to get into.
I think, that's the tension, right? You're pointing, right? When is it okay to say to someone, hey, you can go read, you can go if you're looking for that experience, but be curious about why are you so fixed, why are you so attached to having this one experience? Make it part of your inquiry. I think the pitfall of that is, and you see it in the show and you see it in the Psychedelic World, and I've worked with people who had that experience, is that they start getting messages like, oh, the fact that you want to know, the fact that you you want me to tell you what's going to happen, it shows that you have a problem. Or that my favorite quote unquote line in California is, oh, it's your ego. Like, you have an ego problem. Like, yes, we all do. Everybody in the world has an ego problem, if we want to call it a problem, right? But it starts becoming this, I think, a tool of power, where people who facilitate, people who are like more knowledgeable, start making it into like a tool of both power and shame. Like, yeah, I'm anxious and I'm scared. That's not a problem. That's just me having an experience. Like, if anything, I think a good facilitator would work with the person to really untangle that, to understand that. Yeah, if I'm coming to do breathwork with you and I'm like, Kyle, I've done 10 breathwork workshops in the last year. I want to have that I want to have the growth experience, the prenatal matrix, all of it, start to like, right? Like what you said, will it hurt me if you ask me, like, hey, why do you want it so much?
Yeah.
And if you explain to me that maybe it makes me miss the experience that I should have, or keeps me like tunnel vision or something. I don't see them as separate. I don't see them as contradicting to have that experience, to make someone open. As opposed to like, hey, you want to know so much, right? Again, it falls into power, into this very, very, in my mind, spiritual bypassy. Oh, it's your ego. What can someone do with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me go deconstruct my ego and come back, and then we can do this process. Like, what are you supposed to do with that comment? And how is it serving this dynamic? Right? You see it in the show. It's so portrayed so well, I think, where she uses it to push people forward.
Yeah.
To keep going with the process. Even when they're really, really scared.
Yeah.
Or they're like in what we, another like favorite word of mine is when you're in resistance.
Well, it's an interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about that resistance, and like, when is it okay to push somebody? Well, maybe not push, but maybe like encourage somebody. And maybe there's different ways of doing that. I mean, in the show, sometimes it feels really dramatic. It's like, do these people have agency over what they signed up for? And, the facilitator seems like it's her own agenda. And you start to see that as the show progresses, like, she does have an agenda there, right? Like, in the beginning of the show, they say everybody's been selected for a reason, and trying to perfectly curate this experience. And you find out later down the line that there was an agenda there to some degree. But yeah, like, what is the facilitator's agenda? And I think I've chatted about this too, just around like narcissistic facilitators, spotting that. And it's like, do you have agency over your own experience, or is somebody showing up telling you what your experience needs to be and how to do it, instead of trying to create a more collaborative container? And I definitely, in the show, it's like, no, it's the facilitator's agenda and experience saying, this is what you need to do. And, there's elements of needing sometimes that leadership, that encouragement, creating, I guess, those experiences, right? I mean, what was the first one of them? Like digging their own grave, in a sense. And it's like, to some degree, that I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, that seems a little dramatic. But then I was thinking about psychodrama, for example. And that seems really powerful. And I'm sure there's some people who are like, I didn't sign up for this. I don't want to do this. But also thinking about, the power of that psychodrama there, of laying in your own grave in the dirt and coming back up, and having a facilitator curate that and encourage people to go into it could seem beneficial. But I guess it's around how somebody is doing that, right? Is it forceful and say, you need to do this?
Right.
Or,
I mean, let's talk about that. I'm curious, because that brings the question you and I chatted briefly about before, which is, when you are, whatever, with psychedelics and therapy and psychodrama and breathwork, when you are guiding people to uncharted territories, either internal or external, right? Where's the line? Where's the line between ushering people through a threshold? Right, Jung talked about, he has this beautiful quote saying that when you're in it, it's the analyst's like flickering light of consciousness that's guiding the patient and the therapist. Right, and even that sentence can be read multiple ways. It's like, who is this therapist that he thinks, he, she, they think that they can guide with their consciousness in the darkest of dark? Like, who said that? And what does that say as far as the power dynamic? And right, there is some truth there that when we go to someone else, we expect them to be more trained, more experienced, that they have something that will help us navigate these uncharted terrains. And where's the line? Where's the line between I'm going to tell you what you should do versus you came here for that reason. You came here to help you, to be a guide, to be your ally. I mean, I've told you this story, and I worked with someone who went to do an underground session in somewhere in Hawaii, and had the facilitator yell at him for 3 hours, "You need to have a breakthrough. You need to have a breakthrough. You're not focused enough. You're not," literally yelling. And it traumatized the person. I mean, it was good for them in the long term. It traumatized me when I heard it. I was like, I just try to imagine the scene. I try to imagine the scene where anyone is yelling at anyone else. You need to have a breakthrough. There is something so irrational in that statement, right? It already hints to something else that's happening on a deeper level.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be a good example of someone who is, like you said, caught up by their agenda. Right? You paid me a certain X amount of money. You need to have this experience. This is what I want you to have.
Yeah.
For some reason, as opposed to like, okay, let's stay open.
I guess this even kind of comes up in therapy too, right? Like people coming to you wanting expert advice, and then, some therapists are I know what's going on with you. You need to do X, Y, and Z, or, you have the other therapist that's more collaborative, more open, not giving as much advice. And something that comes up with the show and this conversation and themes just around like the manipulation that some of the characters present, saying, "Hey, you have all this information on us. You had us disclose all of our deepest, secrets. You know all that, and you're using that against us in some way, right?" And that's really interesting too, right? I mean, even just thinking about therapy, right? People are sharing all this deep stuff, and then just thinking about the power dynamics there. How do we show up and navigate that? I mean, we could have intuitive insight where the person needs to go, and they just shared all this deeply personal stuff, and how do we then show up and help guide that person? Is it us saying, "Oh, I know, and I'm going to force you to do it this way because now I know everything about you," or is it still more kind of open and collaborative? And I don't know. There's definitely some of those people that need more of a strict guidance, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
To some degree.
Exactly. And it depends. I think that's such a good point. It should be person to person.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's what's missing from the show, or semi-missing, which is she has this grand agenda that has no regard for like personal differences. Who can take on what? Who can take less? Who can take more? First, I'll try it, see what happens to you, and then we'll adjust if needed. How is it held? And especially, again, in the psychedelic space, when you're so open, right? I think maybe it's worth, I don't know how much people truly, viscerally understand that when you open yourself up with plants or psychedelics, you really give the other person a nonverbal permission to look deeply into yourself.
Yeah.
You're really putting yourself in someone else's hands in a very, very vulnerable way. Even if you're an experienced psychonaut, even if you really open yourself to things that are also not visible, right? That are invisible. I mean, that's shamanism will teach us that from the beginning. You open yourself to that. If you want to hear the plants, you have to open yourself to that extent. But it also means that other things will come. Right? And how do we, it's such a delicate, tender space, complex space to navigate. And who is the person sitting in front of you? How are they, like you said, how are they holding your trauma? When you're this open, they're gonna just like poke you with it, or like try to push you towards it, or they're aware of they work with your resistance, right? We call it in therapy, you work with the defenses. You don't try to plow through them. Usually when you try to plow through them, they just come back with a vengeance.
Right.
That's why they're there. They're there to protect. And again, at the same time, it's what we said, it's the facilitator, right? Part of the expectation is, or part of the role from the beginning of days, what I know, right? The priest, the shaman, the rabbi, the channeling, like virgin on the mountain in Greece, they were all there to give you something. It means that they have something that you don't. Right? They will channel something, they will bring something, they have some kind, they devoted themselves to a certain way of life, to a certain path that is supposed to give you, it's not even give you something that you don't have, but is supposed to complement your life in some way, show you edges. And at some point, right, and especially now, we're in this very complicated time where how do we do that, but within a community-based model, where it doesn't mean that I'm above you.
Yeah.
Versus what we know, which is if I have something that you don't, and you pay me for it, obviously I'm above you. Obviously there's a hierarchy here. And if you start pushing against my hierarchy, then we have to set this straight. Like, I know what I'm doing. That's why you're here. You came to me.
Well, you kind of see that too in the show with like the you have the main facilitator. What was her name? Masha, not Marsha. Masha. But then her like kind of other facilitators that are under her that start trying to challenge her at times. And it seemed like she really provided a lot to them to some degree. Like, and then so they really trust her, but also now starting to question that, like, should we be doing that? And kind of seeing that like kind of guru mentality come out of this, like the main facilitator saying like, no, yes, like, I know. Trust me.
Keep telling them, trust me.
Yeah.
At some point, she even hits to one of the helpers, like, are you on your dose? Like, are you doing your work?
Yeah.
Like, you're not trusting.
Well, that was an interesting comment, right? Like, how do we, when somebody's challenged, they push it back on the other person saying, well, it doesn't seem like you're doing your work.
Your work.
How much do we see that sometimes in communities, right?
How much do we see that, and how much this is a really important piece of the psychedelic world today, which is at least the way I'm taking what you're saying, is our integrity as a community. Right? If I see my shamanic, my psychedelic, my therapeutic, my ever mentors doing things that are not kosher, do I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, we say but we also know that a lot.
Oh, no, I just meant in agreement to that question. Yeah.
Right? It seems like obviously it's like, yeah, of course, what do you mean? But it's so, I don't even know. It's tricky. Exactly. I don't know. Is it tricky, or is it, like, again, it's because those communities create this, let's just say it, you and I talked about it. They create this, like, if there is a guru, it means there is a group. There's a sangha, or there is a cult, or there is something that's cult-like, right? There is a group that has a very, very strong identity. And if I'm going to challenge the person, either the group's identity or the leader's identity, I'm a threat, right? I'm always a threat of being expelled, of being rejected, of being... And there is let's be straightforward. There is a lot of... There's a good enough amount of reports about emotional abuse. It doesn't have to be sexual, but emotional misuse of power, psychological misuse of power in those spaces, where people are being, right, their traumas being kind of, people who facilitate don't have trauma work experience, or haven't done this kind of work, and try to use whatever good tools they have, and it ends up hurting the person even more. I worked with people who came back from experiences feeling more traumatized than they walked in. Because they're like, oh my, all of a sudden I felt like I was being told that I have a problem, that me not being able to work through my trauma is my issue. And here is how it's related to my childhood or my character flaw or this and that. So I went in with hoping to get, with desperation or hope to get healing, and I came back feeling a lot more ashamed. Right, so that show really brought up for me, and I like this idea of how, what does it take for us to start having a conversation about how do we hold each other accountable?
Accountable, yeah.
So there is integrity.
Yeah, and I guess when we break this down and like think about that, chatting to people that have been in those circles, I don't think I've really felt that, but just thinking about this person's really helped me, and there's a lot of good in this person, but they also did this thing that I necessarily didn't agree with, or they harmed me, but they really helped me and saved my life. And I think that's where it gets tricky, right? It's like, here's somebody that is maybe potential, like causing harm, perpetuating abuse on some level. But then on the other hand, person felt saved by them. And then when you have that in the community, maybe people have kind of noticed a little bit of the abuse, but everybody has that common thing of feeling saved or healed. Then it's, that outweighs the negative that's starting to happen. And I guess you see this, watching any sort of documentary on like cult-like behaviors or cults, where you start to see that start to form and shape, where it starts to become scary to then question that. And then, again, it kind of hits our most primitive feelings of being expelled from the group, right? Well, if we're not part of a group, then we don't really survive, right? I always come back to something my teacher Lenny always states, like, we're the descendants of successful tribes, right? If we were just alone, we wouldn't have survived. And so, being shunned outside the group hits that survival threat of I'm not going to make it. So
exactly. I'm not going to make it. And especially in modern time where isolation and alienation feels even more prominent. So by the time you belong to a group that makes you feel safe and special and heal, and you're being taken care of, and like that famous, like the Cheers, like that show, right? Everybody knows your name and you feel welcomed and you feel held and connected. That's rare for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But, if I zoom out from what you're saying, I think most of us will be like, wait, if someone is both violating your boundaries and abusing you, but then it's nice, and that sounds like the classical abusive relationship.
Totally, right?
That's what creates that dissonance in abusive relationships, because you know that tomorrow may be a good day, so you suffer through the bad days. You rationalize them. You negotiate with them. I mean, that's where this conversation feels so, and that show I think did a good job, and this conversation feels so important, which is, I think when it comes to abuse, the lines should be very, very clear. If someone is touching someone inappropriately, that's what it means. There is no working around it. If you feel repetitively shamed, or like you don't feel safe in your body, or you feel like confused around someone repetitively, that's a sign. But I think, there's a bigger problem here, is and it's so complex. How do we get to do that on that, like Lenny said, on a tribe level? Because we don't have tribal councils anymore, right? We don't have a tribal council for the psychedelic community.
No, it's so fractured, right? And that just word community, like, what does that even mean, right? You have all these different communities within the psychedelic community, and where do you go? It is very fractured. It's not. And
who's going to sit on this tribal community? Who's going to choose the people who sit there to make it feel right? So it becomes all this mishmash of. That's where I think. In the show, you and I talked about it, they do a good job, the participants, challenging the leader. They keep coming back to her with their, like, hey, this feels weird. Hey, you're doing this. This is not okay, right? There's something I think there's even like a whole ethic conversation there at some point. It's unethical, right? And that's why I think, if anything, I hope this conversation we're having is how do we empower each other, the participants, the observers, how do we come together and empower each other to be like, hey, I'm noticing this thing. This should be talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of going along for the ride. And yeah, and too, with the helpers too, right? Like the one ended up leaving, trying to get help, really kind of going against their guru, their leader, because what they saw just didn't feel right, didn't feel safe, didn't feel good. And yeah, how do you start to speak up? I guess that's the question. How do we, when we do see something like that, how do we find a way to speak up and address it? Because it can be scary, right? Like, am I wrong here? Is this right? And then especially, I guess when we're talking about manipulation and emotional abuse, gaslighting, right? Kind of comes back on you in a way. And
I think it's, and to add to that, psychedelics is such a niche space still. And if you, right, it's horrible to say it, but if you're going to have that reputation of being the whistleblower, you might get shunned from the whole space on itself.
Yeah.
Right? So there is I think there is a deeper even threat of, well, if I'm going to say anything, I'm risking my being around this world in general. Like, nobody's going to want to train me. Nobody's going to want to be, like, doing this stuff with me. So should I jeopardize that to out just one person?
Yeah.
Or one community? Do I have, right? And that's where that dissonance starts. You start convincing yourself why, right? But it's also true. It's also true. There is a chance that the space as a whole will start getting weary of you if you speak too much, if you speak too loud.
Yeah, and I think too, like I've definitely heard this from time to time. We're at this point where it's so exciting, right? The research is really taking off. It's starting to become mainstream. And something that I've heard is don't fuck it up, right? Even though some of this stuff is happening, it's almost like it's okay. Let's just get through FDA approval. Let's get through what's going on and then address it, where it's like, what's more important? To some degree, I guess, if you're looking at the whole mission to get, this more acceptable, to get healing access to these medicines, to make it more normalized, that is important. But also at what cost? Like, how is that, keeping that alive, also creating a lot of harm by not speaking up and talking about what's actually going on in some of these spaces?
That's such a powerful point. And yeah, and what harm? Is the space more important than 100 people getting abused and traumatized? I don't know.
I mean, just one person.
Right? We can justify, like, the space will create, exactly. Right? Yeah. But that's when I think for me, it's like capitalism, the capitalistic part of the psyche starts doing math. It's like, wait, but the space will heal thousands of people. We'll take care of it. We'll just do it quietly. We won't tell anyone about it. We'll keep it under the rug. Right? And it would, the show ends in a very, very Hollywoody, good note, but we live in cancel culture for the most part. We live in a world where it's a lot, the way to deal with these things is really, it's very challenging. So, and the tendency is to split. Yeah. You and I talked about this idea of dissociative psychology versus confrontational psychology, right? I think when it comes to stuff like money, sex, death, abuse, right, we lean towards dissociative psychology. Cancel culture is a dissociative psychology kind of tool. Oh, this person has done something wrong. It's horrible. Yes, we don't excuse it, but do you cancel the entire person?
Yeah.
How does that fit with psychedelics and entheogens and all this thing about forgiveness and acceptance and grief?
I was actually thinking about this the other day because, I was thinking about the Shadow series that we put together, and this was something that I think I brought up towards the end of that when we were doing our kind of closing thoughts of just like, if psychedelics is about healing and we're talking about forgiveness and healing, is there, some sort of reform right? Like, do we provide that to people and say, hey, humans are flawed. We're all going to fuck up eventually. There's probably been times I've fucked up, and, you know, we're human, right? We're going to slip or fall. It's messy. Our path isn't linear. And, but yeah, can we also create that container for the healing to happen? You know, yeah, cancel culture is interesting. It pushes it away, right? It like we dissociate from it and say, no, it's just easier not to think about it, and push it away instead of saying, well, yeah. And I get it from one perspective. Somebody did something bad, you know, it's like, do you just forgive them? Probably not. There's got to be probably like, you know, steps, right, to rebuild that trust and et cetera, et cetera. But like, you know, can we even start that process? I think that's like where cancel culture comes in. They don't, that process has never started because it's just, let's shun them and push them out instead of like, let's hearing it. Because if you start to hear it, then you start to, I guess, side on from their perspective, and that's also bad as well. But if we're talking about psychedelics and healing, do we give people a chance from time to time?
Can we become more nuanced? I love what you're saying, and think like, yeah, you know, this person did fucked up things, bad things, hurtful things. Does it automatically mean that this person is bad and it's doomed to never change?
Yeah.
Because there for me, there is a very nuanced, very like difference. Because if I think that that person is bad, I am locating in them a certain type of untreatable, like, evil. That cancels it. And that's really dangerous because that is the epitome of dissociative psychology. They are evil, and then hence I should not deal with them ever again. I think there is something about it. And there are people who are that, but they're very rare. I think most of us are, like you said, we are people who sometimes do bad things, who sometimes hurt people, shame people, make mistakes, get caught up in our own narcissism and unconsciousness and grandiosity and act out our traumas. That does not make me a bad person, and that's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to connect with. It's a lot harder to relate with. And I think that's the paradox of this whole psychedelic world, which is, yeah, okay, but we all go into those spaces and come out having this nuance and like, oh, I reconcile with my dad who physically abused me for 10 years, but now I see the forgiveness, I see the healing. But then the moment we come out of it enough, the next person who's going to hurt us is going to suffer through the same splitting, and it's not to accuse anyone, but it's for us to be like, to bring that into question of like, so what do we do with these things instead of learning from them? These stories that come up, this power abuses that come up, these just real issues. How do we not cancel them, and how do we stay in connection? And I think maybe you said it, Kyle. Like, do we have the containers for it? We don't have. We don't have the tribe to come together and the two people to stand and reconcile it for hours until they get somewhere.
Yeah.
We have.
I guess it just even makes me think of like the prison system, for example, of like, you know, thinking about different countries that take a different approach to it. Obviously, yes, there's people in there that are very, I guess I'll use the word evil, right? And then you maybe have people that are in there that did some bad things, but putting that label that they'll never be able to heal and transform, it's like we're just setting people up for failure. If we just constantly continue that narrative, I mean, who's gonna want to change if you're constantly told you're a bad person and you're treated like that? Chances are you're probably just gonna stay like that, versus, maybe giving them a second chance. I mean, I think it's really fascinating, like what Leary and some of those others were doing with like psychedelics in the prison system back in the day, right? Like, could that provide a chance for somebody to dig into their history and be like, oh, wow, like, you know, I robbed somebody, you know, I was in this trauma response and I dealt with all this abuse when I was a child, and I was constantly in survival mode because I had to, like, I didn't have food on the table, and I was literally just in like survival mode, and that's why I did that. And could I heal from that, and could I move on from it? I'm just, you know, painting some examples here, but
I think you're right on.
To explore.
I was thinking about, I was having prisons flash in my mind too, like 3 minutes ago. And it makes me think of Gabor Mate's work and Peter Levine's work, right? I read this quote by Peter Levine recently about how trauma is the most underused, underappreciated, minimized force that is shaping our life and our culture. And I think, Gabor really, like, his work is really about that. Like, even in the people who commit the most horrible atrocities, you can find a link to trauma. Now, it doesn't justify the behavior.
No.
But it really brings the question of what you're saying. It's like, wait, if we had systems that can take care of people and see them as people who have been repetitively or traumatized enough and not get treated, that led them, is there hope for them? Is there a place for, is there a place for retribution? Is there a place for them to kind of, earn their soul again and win space in society again? Or are we perpetuating not just systems like interpersonal systems of power, but like organizational systems of power, where if you're not a good enough person, you get cast out? Right? You get cast out to jail, to purgatory for how many years, or you get a stamp of shame throughout your life. So certain places won't hire you, because the system has deemed you untreatable, or basically the system is saying, we don't care enough to treat you. We're not going to allocate the resources. We're not going to allocate the time.
Yeah.
Which feeds back, I think, to then the personal healing, right? Then people come and they're in despair or looking for space.
This conversation reminds me, I don't know how true this is, with memes floating around throughout the years, but, there's definitely saw this somewhere around an indigenous tribe where they talk about having a song you're born in with a song. And if you do something bad, you come back to the circle, back to the tribe, and they sing you that your soul song when you've gone too far off the path. And I don't know, that just kind of rang the bell of sometimes people start to deviate off their path. They start to get caught up in their traumas. They start to get caught up in environmental situations. They start to act out in certain ways. And it's can we come back to that core part of ourselves that would never want to do that? And it just reminded me, we were recording with James Fadiman a few weeks ago, and he started talking about one of his newer books, Symphony of Selves. But we were talking about parts, right? And I mentioned something about harmonizing parts, and he's like, well, no, you wouldn't want to harmonize and give more emphasis to that part that robs somebody. That's terrible, right? But it's also acknowledging the part that robs that person, and how do we start to say, what's going on there? What does this part need? Obviously, as you said, that's a bad act. We shouldn't condone that and say, oh, it's okay that I have this damaged part that makes it okay. It's no, that's still not okay. But how do we start to go in and see what that part is actually yearning for? It's actually needing. And how do we nourish that without the robbing? Still, have accountability for those actions. That's what you did. But also start to acknowledge, hey, there's something that needs to be done here, right? I mean, I guess even thinking about just in therapy, when people come in with so much shame around certain things, and, it's I don't say right off the bat, you're a bad person. It's what's going on here, right? How do we find a way to work with it? Okay, yeah, you did this thing, and, you're going to have to be accountable for that. But also, is that really what you wanted to do, right? Or is that how you really wanted to act? And the chances are no, right? It was like a defense mechanism. It triggered something in me. I yelled at this person, or I punched this person. It's that's not what I wanted. It's just, I got caught up in, my physiology. It's just, boom, all this stuff started to emerge, and I acted on it. How do we not shame that part right away? Hold yourself accountable, but also how do we start to, how do we heal that as well?
Yeah, you're making me think of IFS and exiles. I mean, I don't know what Fetterman meant by not harmonizing, but this makes me think of, you don't want to exile any part of you, right? Because we already know, we have enough knowledge that anything we exile builds up energy in the unconscious, and then eventually shows up either as symptoms or acting out. Right? That's why I love this talk that I shared with you about confrontational psychology, right? The idea is to bring all the parts that are me into my table of consciousness and build some kind of relationship. And relationship can also mean being really, really boundaried and very on top of certain parts of myself, because I know that if they are left without attention or they need more healing, then they will do things, they will act themselves out and do things that I don't want to do. They will speak mean to someone. They will take advantage of people. They will harm people.
Yeah.
But that's, for me, that is a sort of harmony. I really appreciate what you said. I think I'm with you. That's harmony. Harmony is not just flowers and lilies and like harps playing and like, perfect Zen. Harmony is balance, right? And balance that's why I love, again, to refer to the show. You really see, I really appreciated how they portrayed healing. It's messy. It's messy there. People revisit repetitive flashbacks and feelings and sensations that they cannot tolerate to create the true balance, which is I can go through a whole feeling cycle with this memory. I can go through a whole somatic cycle with this memory. And it doesn't make me run away into candy or drugs, right? There's someone there who's addicted to pain pills or to drinking or to spurts of like violent rage, whatever it is, right? Everybody there has their there's that father who's addicted to like positivity and happiness and is always cheerful, right? We all have that outlet that we play for that unhealthy version of balance.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. We need to.
Well, coming back to this like topic of forgiveness, I just was reminded in the show one of the characters did something really terrible to the main facilitator years and years ago, and then towards the end, the facilitator is like creating this space for forgiveness to some degree, right? Like able to forgive themselves, allow this person to heal, and I think at the end, in the closing, that one person was saying, like, somebody provided the space for me to forgive. And, that was powerful to think about. I don't want to spoil it, but that's why I'm being really vague here. But, the one character, ended up doing something really, really terrible, which I don't know how anybody could forgive somebody for something like that, right?
Let me ask you, let's make it more interesting for us. How I think forgiveness, I'm curious what you think. I think forgiveness is a lot harder than true, full forgiveness. It's not I forgive you. It's not a sentence. It's not a moment. It's a process.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think we have a lot of work to do to really be able to do that. And again, about this very intense or very things that are at odds with how we understand humanity, I think it's hard to forgive.
Yeah, it is.
Even be in the process of forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
We think about, if anyone listening will think about the person who hurt them the most in the last month. Like really, really hurt them. And be like, did I really forgive this person, or I'm just like sliding it through?
Right. That's a good question. Like, you could say you forgive them. Like, there's still elements of like, maybe there's elements of peace there. But then also, when do you get angry still at that situation or hold a grudge towards them and feel that? I definitely, just thinking personally, I think there's some situations I could say that I forgave that person and have started that process, but it's not fully resolved, right? Like there's still a little more emotion there at times of going, ugh, like that comes up every once in a while. And then it's like a practice of like, okay, well, what was going on there? How did I respond? Can I kind of work on this on different levels? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a long process. And it's hard. It's really hard. Exactly. It's not easy.
I think the best model we have that I know of is either the tribe model of forgiveness, or actually this might sound like a weird association, but couples when there's adultery. Mm. Right? Every model that has to do with how couples reconcile It means that that process is a long-term process. And like you said, the person who's been cheated on has to be able to be angry and then forgive, and then be hurt, and then forgive. And then, right, it's an ongoing, because there's so much parts. So if we want to do like the dissociative thing, we'll be like, okay, let me figure it out and I'll forgive you. As opposed to like, no, is it okay for us to be in relationship? Maybe that's how do we stay in close relationship and have this process still be okay between us? Not just be okay, be allowed, be permitted, and be honored between us.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to me going into, well, you know what? You abused me, that's it. You have that's it. We have to cut it off, right? It's so...
Well, when is that important?
Exactly.
I wonder on the flip side, like, when is that important? I'm sure, like, you see that a lot, where do we put up those boundaries, and when are those boundaries much needed?
On the opposite side, we also have to learn how to say I think there is something about, sometimes there is time to put a very hard boundary and just walk away. Even if it means just for a month or for 6 months or for 3 years, you just walk away.
Yeah.
But we feel all these obligations. Again, it's all that relational spider web. We feel if it's for the teacher, for the guru, or for the, I remember in the movie about Trungpa, the Crazy Wisdom, they were interviewing, they got to the part where they're talking about how he had like this ongoing parade of women coming in and out of his room, and everybody knew, nobody said anything. And people couldn't make sense of it. And they interviewed Ramdas about it, and he's like, if anything, these people should say thank you. He showed them the imperfection. He showed them this thing. He showed them what it means that humanity, that even the guru is human and messy. Now, obviously, I wouldn't say you need to thank him for abusing women or for
no,
that's not what I'm hinting, but right, in the sense that it breaks away, that it should encourage you, like where we started, should encourage you to do something about it, to have an integrity about it, to break away from that illusion of power, from that bond of power and dependency. So layered. It's so there's so many intricacies there.
So many little things there. Something when we said about boundaries, and I wonder too, just in terms of like healing and forgiveness, and just thinking about, say if we were able to do, a nice kind of like social reform with somebody, right? Like, how much do you focus on that process also versus stepping away and creating a boundary? Like, I'm thinking about, in the past where like I was really hurt or something bad happened to me. I had to step away for months or like a year or something like that before I could even engage, and how much of actually, I guess, like trying to work through it just kept spiraling the healing process, or like, just caused more tension where it was like, I don't even know if this is productive anymore. I think we both have to like go apart, and I don't know, that's just how I process too. Like I need like alone time and quietness to process. But yeah, just some other thoughts that kind of came up just around that forgiveness. Like, how much do we emphasize and keep prodding for the healing versus, how much healing actually happens in taking space and, creating those boundaries.
And there's no one answer, right?
Yeah, I think it's very individual, right?
I think it's really about meeting those edges in yourself. And like we said, it's harder when there is community and you feel attached, and there's, right? We can start psychology, like building a whole psychology theory in it. But yeah, there is, as a culture, we're not good either with, I think most of us can learn about still putting out boundaries. I think maybe it's putting out boundaries, but maybe the question that feels more prominent for this conversation is, how do I maintain boundaries when they end up taking away something that I feel is important or meaningful to me?
Yeah.
Right? Because like you said, the teacher is both the healer and can be the teacher, the healer, and the person who's abusing. And then that's when we start doing that negotiation. And I think that's where there is maybe a deeper emotional maturity or emotional development question, which is, how do I break up with this person, with this community, with this team, even though it breaks my heart to do it? Right? Because for me, there is a really deep question of connection to self, right? When you choose yourself to that level, you can break your own heart. Because you know that that's what's right. Versus when we're still in that dynamic of, like you said, understandable. Like, I don't want to be lonely. I don't want to be cast out. I don't want to lose these people. They were so meaningful to me. It's painful to lose that. But it also means that there's a disconnection from self there.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it was interesting in the show, too, just thinking about breaking up from the community, like seeing some of the people wanting to leave and finding that boundary of like, I'm out, like this is just too much for me. And how much courage that takes sometimes to admit that to yourself.
Incredible.
You know, a lot of people, it's scary to do that. Like, when is enough enough? When you're like, I can't tolerate this anymore, and I'm going to respect my own boundaries here, my own self, and say, no.
And you said it, I think halfway through, it also brings up the question of, am I doing the right thing? Am I seeing things clearly? Am I just being paranoid, right? You start going through all that self-unraveling to make sure that you're making the right choice. You don't end up having like all this remorse and regret, and then you're out and you're losing. You're out of the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, there is something interesting though about this show, because it also played really well this idea that even though the facilitator was acting out all over the place, and there was so much you can say about the ethics of if this person was real, how it did create this for each character there. It created this, what's the word? This interaction, this confrontation with their desire for healing versus desperation for healing. Right? Everybody there goes through a moment. They're like you said, they're like, what am I doing here? Obviously, there's something wrong. And she either lures them back through reminding them of the pain they're carrying or why they're here, right? Or they remind themselves, like, but I know that I have this thing to work on. Right? So I think that there's something also meaningful there as far as, like, what is the motive that keeps us connected to spaces, to people? Is it my desperation because I'm suffering, or is it because I feel safe and I feel held and I feel connected? And those can feel very, very similar. Right? They can feel incredibly similar. I've been in spaces that I know were not good for me. In retrospect, I understood were not good for me. But my desire to do the work bypassed. And I couldn't see how, if you're not feeling comfortable and safe, the work is not is not happening. Or it cannot happen on the depth you want it to happen. Because there was always this part of me that was like, I can't open up totally. This is not a safe place. I can't let go. It's not a safe place.
And we know how important that is, right? To really feel safe in that, to go deeper.
Sure.
Yeah, another thing about like the show, like just thinking about like, you know, part of the reason why this person like created this treat, and just thinking a big focus, it seemed like, was on death. And there was something that really resonated with me. So I don't know how much of a spoiler this is, but the main facilitator had this near-death experience, and you know, they were kind of creating some of these like things around reproducing near-death like experiences. And you know, after I had mine, that was the thing that really kind of got me on the healing path. I mean, that was a question that I kept asking myself, like, what if like we could have these types of experiences? Would it shift the way that we interact? And when we think about like some of the dangerous situations that, you know, she presented with, you know, like the fake fire room, for example, people thought they were, you know, in this room. You know, when we think about like traditional rites of passages, I mean, sometimes the people didn't make it back alive, right? Needing that element of of death, of real like threatening of your safety, does produce something within us at times. It gets us to some sort of experience that goes, holy shit, this is real, right? And you know, I do find that to be interesting, especially for those traditions that still practice pretty extreme rites of passages, right? Like, is that ethical? Is that good, bad? Could you say that that's abuse that's happening? What's the outcome?
Is it cultural intersection, right? We're borrowing from ancient like rites of passage, and we're pushing beyond like modern day psychology, which is so, some can say, clean and neat inside a very comfy room. I actually wanted to ask you a question about the death part, because obviously you came to my mind, because there is this. Maybe it is a spoiler, right? But she offers certain participants an opportunity to go into the world of the dead and meet their deceased son. And right, we already know that like ayahuasca, for example, right, that's Quechua for vine of the dead. There is a connection to. And what do you think about, is it unethical? Is it a violation to tell people like, hey, you know, there is a way to communicate with the dead? Are we, are we right, culturally appropriating? Are we falsifying advertisement, or are we actually representing the full spectrum of these plants and what they can do? I found that because there's the dialogue in the show around that was very
well, and it seemed like that was the riskiest thing, right? Because when she tried to reproduce this before like an event happened, and so there was an element of danger around reproducing this, and I can't remember the concoction, but like you know, it was like
LSD,
psilocybin,
DMT,
but I thought there was two other ones, or another.
Oh no, it was LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and ayahuasca.
I forget what she said, but
it's not ayahuasca. I know, but something. And there was like the most powerful potent.
And so I was just thinking about that protocol and that medicine, and just, but you know, the way I found it to be, I found it to be fascinating, right? Because that is thinking about like parapsychology and transpersonal psychology. To be able to have an experience like that, like that's fascinating. And what kept coming up for me, I don't know if anybody's seen like the OA. It's been a while since I've seen that. I need to kind of revisit it. But just these consciousness experiments to see like how far we can kind of push the boundaries. And I think about that with like, you know, something like the proposed DMTX, extended state DMT. Like, what are the boundaries that we can push here in understanding consciousness in this reality? And is that possible to connect with dead loved ones, with ancestors? And to some degree, I find that to be completely interesting. And I think, you know, could be some sort of valid research project. But yeah, the ethics around it is interesting as well. And the way that the show approached it, I think, was a little unethical, right? Because it was this person's agenda. It was like, this was the perfect combination. They had no idea what they were signing up for. Again, it comes back to, I guess, that context. If you know what you're signing up for, and you could, you know, maybe present it in a way that's, you know, this could be a possibility. I mean, you know, when I talk about like the possibilities of transpersonal experiences, you know, I put that in there, reconnecting with loved ones, maybe meeting ancestors, or having loved ones contact you. I mean, there's been many times leading breathwork sessions where people have recently had loved ones pass, and they come back into the session to give them messages, just like what was happening in that show. But again, it's the context and how you approach it. I think in the show, when I saw that, I was like, ooh, this is so unethical. It's like giving me, you know, kind of like a weird feeling that this is the facilitator's agenda, not really being upfront about everything and really pushing that because that's their interest. Right. And I think that's where the line for me was like, that's a little her approach.
Where she came from.
But having consent around that, being curious, and like having, you know, people, sign up for that with Because, well, and that's the other thing. I mean, with any sort of transpersonal experience, you can't really predict it. So to say, like, this is going to happen, like, I don't know, I find that to be a weird statement, too. Like, you know, this is going to happen to you. Well, I don't know. I mean, anything could happen. I don't know how to predict that. I mean, that's the most interesting thing about psychedelics in general is that, like, you know, when somebody asks me, like, what is going to happen? Anything could happen. I mean, I come back to, like, say, you know, my lineage here with, like, Lenny and the Groff is that it's an amplification of your inner experience. And what is your inner experience? It's everything from, like, the Whiteheadian perspective. It's the entire past. You could really amplify the entire past. So is that reliving past life experiences? Is that reliving certain experiences of, you know, being able to interact with past loved ones? Everything is there as a possibility. Hard to really pinpoint to say what is going to happen, but, you know, it's there for a possibility to be explored and experienced. I don't know, any thoughts or comments?
No, I'm taking what you're saying in. I'm thinking about, yeah, you know, I agree. I think it's all in, I mean, it's all in the attitude, right? There is one thing to present it like in the show where she was like presenting it as a guaranteed consequence. Like, we are going to see your dead child. Like, this is what's going to happen. If I just give you this, and this is what's going to happen, right? That's praying.
Well, think about, like, psychics, right? So, like, if you're providing a service like that, guaranteeing that and taking money and saying this is what's going to happen, I mean, yeah, that's a very vulnerable population of people wanting to reconnect. And to say that you can facilitate that every time, I'd just be highly skeptical from my perspective.
I mean, yeah, I would be highly skeptical. And I also know for, you know, like you, I know that's, I love how you said that. It's the potential is there, right? Like you said, if psychedelics and entheogens open the door for mystery, then the mystery includes everything. I mean, I interviewed someone who had a feeling of this mild depression throughout her life. And she lost her dad when she was pretty young. And in an ayahuasca experience she had in Central America, she saw her dad and he revisited with her every stage of her life. He wasn't there, but they did it together. And she told me, you know, what was interesting is she said it with a big smile. She was like, I could feel him. I could feel his skin. We were dancing. I was dancing on his feet as a child. And then I grew up and he was there with me. And then I grew again and he was there until I got to my age. And in that moment, she said, I realized that I can now let him go. Now, that my depression was about not letting him go because I missed him and I wanted to have those experiences. And obviously, her depression didn't just miraculously lift, but it eased significantly, and she had all this material to work with. Right? So, can you open an ayahuasca branch in Peru that says guaranteed, you know, like, visits to the world of the spirit? I don't know. Is that ethical?
Well, it's interesting, like, you bringing this up now, it just got me thinking about, like, when I was working with, like, the shamanic practitioner that I worked with, you know, during one class, we had to venture into the spirit or the realm of the dead. And there's a whole kind of way to go about doing that. You know, there's steps on, you know, go to this point, you know, take the ferry, go over this. And then, you know, during that experience, I did have a really profound experience with my grandmother that passed. And, you know, I guess in shamanism, that realm is possible and there's instructions to go there. So, you know, it's something that was taught. And, you know, but I guess that comes back to cosmology, right? Like, within that cosmological realm, they have that realm exists. They have a map to get there. They're able to maybe help guide people through that, and say, you know, these are the steps to get to the land of the dead. And I don't know, it's always funny, like, even when I think about, like, shamanic journeys, like my one teacher, I mean, this has always been helpful, especially when I've, like, done journey work with people. my one teacher is like, sometimes the spirits go on vacation. They go away. The door isn't open, right? And so when I, do drumming or I help, guide somebody through that and they get upset, they're like, oh, like I didn't have a spirit animal come to me or this or that. Like I always just think about like what my teacher said. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes the spirits just go on vacation. They have their own realm, right? And they're not always present for us. And, that kind of comes back to that relational aspect. What's our relationship there? Is that, kind of like, I think did we talk about this at some point? But, I was just kind of talking about this today. Hillman, for example, talking about dreams. Like the dream's not mine. Like what part of me wants that experience and saying, I control that realm versus that's in the realm of psyche. And so if we're thinking about like ancestors or something like that, it's like, are they there? Are they off doing their own thing? What is it within me that's saying, you need to come here now? Are they there in that realm right now? And are they going to be present? It might be accessible, but yeah, again, maybe they're on vacation enjoying themselves somewhere and you showed up in their space and they're like, what the hell are you doing here?
And just the fact that we're saying, hey, ancestors, come here, it means that we're acknowledging that there is a there. There is a there that's accessible. There is a there that we can get to somehow, right? Yeah, we talked about it at some point, right? Because he talks about it in Dreams in the Underworld, right? The dreams, in which dream space, and from like what I was explaining, ayahuasca space, for example, is the same space. It's just different methods of getting there, right? But in the dream world, things are happening because they need to happen. That's it. It has nothing to do with wish fulfillment and, right? All the ways in which you think you control reality. It's like, it happens on its own accord. I guess the last piece I wanted to ask you is about what did you think? Again, I know that show is very Hollywood and it's fast, but how they portrayed the issue of trauma and how trauma was dealt with.
I'm trying to think. Like it was, well, I guess it was interesting, like going back to that like aspect of prodding, right? Because some of those characters had trauma, and it was like the guru, main facilitator, kind of wanted to prod that. And when I think about like, somatic psychotherapy and these other approaches where we're talking about titration, safe container, like that definitely did not seem like a trauma-informed retreat center. If I was to work out my traumas, would I do really well there? Probably not. I probably wouldn't feel safe enough. Like you said, do I feel safe enough in this container to go deep? So, yeah, that was definitely something that popped up in my head as I was watching. I was like, this definitely does not feel very trauma-informed. But I don't know. What were some of your thoughts about it?
Yeah. No, similarly to you, it did bring, I think, as a psychotherapist who was in this world, I have this ongoing fascination with facilitators providing trauma treatment but not being trauma informed, and how I have multiple feelings about it. So obviously that show does it great. None of those people who work there there's no hint of them being anything but trauma informed. They're all coming from their own near-death experience or whatever and feel like, okay, I'm here on a calling. So then there's that, and they did a good job showing the idea that psychedelics can create incredible change in a very short time, and he goes from being anxious opiate pill dependent person to within 5 days. Oh, I haven't taken my opiates in 3 days. I haven't even noticed. Right? It's that kind of thing. But I did appreciate one thing, which is that they did show that healing trauma, even with psychedelics, is a very, very in-depth, grueling, demanding, confrontational experience, as opposed to the narrative that I know exists, but I don't really like to promote, which is that psychedelics can, I've heard 3 sessions and I worked out my lifelong trauma. that just always feels risky to me.
Yeah, I think
like
you are
such a
bringing up a
dangerous
really good
situation.
point there, around how messy the healing process is and how many challenges they were actually going through, right? And then it wasn't like, oh, boom, like I experienced this and I'm healed. Like, yeah, I mean, there are sometimes when I'm watching it, I'm like, is this person going to do something risky, right? Because they're so activated. And I was like, is this going to like, I had no idea where the show was going to take me. And I thought something like really bad was going to happen all of a sudden based on some of the character reactions by going into their traumas, right? And how activating that was to their nervous system. And yeah, so I think that does do a good job of like portraying like how challenging this work is at times, being confronted with shadow material and all that stuff. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Highly recommend that show for anyone interested in.
I thought they
this
might
world.
have could have done like a better job with like some of the psychedelic experiences, but I know yeah, sometimes it felt a little superficial here and there, but it's Hollywood. And yeah, when they were talking about like that combination, I was
Hollywood.
like, how is that working? And just thinking like how much more potent it would have been.
I got
you know?
chills.
Like they took it and then they ran off and were, like doing stuff for like it seemed like an hour, and I'm like, nah, I doubt that person would be able to do that.
I just hearing her name that cocktail out loud gave me like shivers throughout my body. I was like, that sounds like
A rocket ship.
that does not sound like something I want to. Oh yeah, not something I would want to sign up for.
All right, Dr. Ido Cohen, I feel like we could continue to chat and you know, tear this episode apart, because there are, yeah, definitely a lot of themes that are really relevant to touch on, especially within the psychedelic space, facilitating, and yeah, just some of the allegations and misuse and abuse that's been going on recently. So this has been, I think, an important topic to dig into, and yeah, I'm glad that we were able to do this together. So thank you for your time. Anything that you want to close with?
Thank you so much. First of all, just thank you again. Always a pleasure being here and talking to you about anything and just being in your space. So thank you, and thanks Psychedelics today. And yeah, I do. I wanna reemphasize what you just said. This is such an important. I'm an advocate for safety in this space. I think safety is above all. I think that I would hope that these events open spaces for us to think together as, like you said, a very splintered but still community, how we create more integrity, more support, more honesty about things like this for not just present safety, but future safety. And not just safety, because I think by doing this, we are actually calling on both providers to become better and in integrity and more skilled and get more consultation and more honest peer support and peer reflection, and on people who are seeking this healing out to be more empowered. If you don't feel safe, if you talk to someone, acknowledge it in yourself. Even if it means you'll have to go back to square one and start searching a retreat center again or a new therapist or whatever that is. If you don't feel safe in your body, acknowledge it. If this person if you feel like, wait, every time I go out of this meeting, I feel more ashamed or I feel more... Listen to those voices, not doubt those voices. Because I think it can empower everybody and really just take this movement into such a meta integration to really integrate those deeper experiences we have in those spaces on a
thank you for sharing that.
Level.
Very important points. And for those interested that want to dive a little bit more into this topic of like the shadow aspect, definitely check out the course that Dr. Ido Cohen and I put together. It was already last year at this point, but yeah, we dig into a lot of these different topics in that course too. You could find that over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. So yeah, digging into the shadow elements of psychedelia, talking about, group work. That was something that kept coming up, our talk with Laura Northrup. You know, we're talking about somatics, but also kind of the shadow of group work and facilitator stuff. So yeah, check that out, everybody. If you haven't checked out that series yet, a lot of great interviews over there. So thank you again, Ido. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Again, feel free to support us by checking it out on our social media, sharing the podcast around, subscribing, leaving a review on the podcast, and wishing everybody a beautiful weekend, whenever you're listening to this, and we'll catch you on the next episode. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.